As a potential government shutdown looms, many federal programs that keep food on the table could shut down as well.
Maddie Paul breaks down those affected federal programs and how local food shelves will be impacted.
If the federal government shuts down, 7 million users under the Women, Infants, and Children Program, or WIC, will see the federal food program end. U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack says some states may have leftover WIC benefits that could extend a week, but the vast majority of WIC users would see an immediate end to benefits on October 1st.
It's a significant situation for those families who desperately want to take care of their children, desperately want to provide nutritious food, but won't be able to do so because the WIC program will stop.
Vilsack says that the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, won't be affected by a potential government shutdown unless the shutdown extends to the end of October. But when pandemic-era SNAP benefits ended back in March, rural Minnesotans turned to local food shelves to ensure their families had enough to eat.
What we see at the food shelf is that a lot of the times when people are coming here to request food, it's because they need it. Like, they need it at that moment, and they just don't see any other option available to them.
The Mankato Echo Food Shelf supplies food for an average of 120 families a day, and the demand keeps growing, especially when federal food programs cease.
We've become pretty efficient filling orders and being able to get that food out to community members who need it.
In Mankato, Maddie Paul, KEYC News Now.
Echo Food Shelf organizers say they're always welcoming volunteers to their team. To become a volunteer, you can find this story at our website, KEYC.com.